Hello, my name is Robert Teester. I've been a psychotherapist for 36 years and a meditation teacher since 2001. And this talk is a series called The Cultivation of Wisdom, and this specific talk will be on the psychology of parenting. When you talk to parents, most of them are very happy to be parents. They really enjoy their children, and they talk glowingly about the children. But there are shadow sides of parenting, and we're going to delve into the psychology of parenting so that you understand some of the agendas and the hidden agendas that are operating in the background that do affect your children directly. Each set of parents comes from a different family, and each one of them has a mother and a father. And they had various experiences in their family of origin that they bring to parenting. And oftentimes, parenting, there's a power struggle between the parents. One parent wants to raise the children the way they were raised, and then the other parent wants to raise the children the way they were raised in their family of origin. And so there's this disagreement, there's this power struggle that goes on in parenting. And it can be quite difficult to manage. Let's begin with the basics. Each parent is a product of their own parenting, their mother and their father, and in case there's an absent parent, then there's also issues psychologically, even though one parent wasn't even there. It's called abandonment, and that's a very serious psychological issue. But let's assume that there's an intact family, we call when we have a mother and father that raised their children and they stayed together. Even so, parents will get activated. We call this activation when a child grows up. Of course, they start at 0 days old, and then they grow up, day by day. 6 months goes by, a year goes by, and then 2 years, and so forth. Now, if a parent has been wounded, and of course, we're all very wounded on the shadow side of each of us. Nobody had a perfect upbringing. Even though some people that have had a good one will tend to think that theirs was the best. But on the shadow side, as a psychotherapist of over 36 years, these wounds come out in therapy when people turn their gaze inwardly and they look at how they were raised, and you remove the mask of glorifying or adoring the parent. You see that there are wounds there from childhood. Most of the wounds that each of us carry are inflicted from 0 to 5 years old, and then it gets repeated after that in our own life. So when the child hits those ages, the parents will get activated, meaning that the wounds that they have will be touched when the child triggers that age. So if a child activates the parent, and the parent had a wound at 2 or 3, which we all have wounds in the early childhood. We do not remember them. Very few people remember 2 years old, and very few people have memories of 3. Some people have images at 4, and then a little bit more at 5, just snapshots. But mostly it's forgotten, it's buried, and we don't realize it. So that's the point of the talk, is talking about this issue of getting activated. So let's go on the opposite extreme from the wounding, where people have been well received by both parents. The father enjoyed the children when he came home from work, say in a traditional system, and so did the mother. Maybe the mother stayed home, maybe not. But that the children are watched over carefully. Even that can be a problem for a child, because even a child wants to have autonomy even in early childhood. When they begin to, let's say 2 years old, they want to start walking and running, and they want to explore. And there's an overprotectiveness from the parents, and the children are told, no, don't do this and don't do that. Of course, you need to have no's to a child, and the child does need to respect the no if it's legitimate, like running between parked cars and so forth. But a child does want to explore. When they start walking, they want to try to walk, and they want to then try to run. And of course you have to protect that environment. You have to make sure that if they fall, that they don't hurt themselves. They don't fall into the corner of the table and a hard cement floor and so forth. So, but I'm bringing it out because there are also overprotectiveness, and the child feels constrained by the overprotectiveness and rails against that and wants to be able to run. So a good parent will take the child, say, to a grassy park and let them run and play and fall and get up again. But if there's too many no's, for instance, let's say we have a nice music system or stereo system or something like that, and every time the child goes close to it, parent yells at the child. And a yell from a parent to a child, the child hears it, but they actually feel it on the energetic level. It's like a shock wave that hits them, and they're just confused by it. And if you say no too much to a child, it will hurt their spirit. It will damage their spirit to where they feel like they can't explore their environment very much because they're getting too many attacks in the sense of the no's. So you don't want to use too much of your own anger in parenting and hit the child with too much anger, because they feel that deeply, and they will get wounded by that. And if it's repeating, then of course they don't feel safe and they will stop exploring their environment. Now, if you parent strongly and expect your child to be obedient, and there's a great deal of obedience training in your parenting style, the child will want your approval, but they will also not trust you so much. So you have to be careful with the obedience and also the autonomy. If a child experiences, say, abandonment in childhood, or if there's an alcoholic or drug abuser in one of the parents or both, then the child is going to, or if there's strong obedience training, the child is going to get confused. If the wounding goes on between, say, 0 and 7 or 8 years old. The result of hearing too many negative messages about being in the world rather than receptivity on the part of the parents, the child will end up being confused. Now, let's grow the child up a little bit, and let's say that continues on into mid to later adolescence and then teenage years. Then the child's going to become angry, and not so much, they are confused, but they don't know it, but they do know that they're angry. And let's say there's a divorce when the child is 8. The child remembers having both parents there and liked that and needed that. But now there's, say, the father leaves and the mother's raising the children. That child knows what he had at 8 and up. They're cognizant, and earlier too. It's a gray area, but how much do they remember of the father and then he leaves? So I'm just saying in that range of 7, 8, 9, he knew what he had, he lost it, and now when he turns older in adolescence, 11, 12, you can start seeing anger show up, and then he's really going to let you have it when he becomes a teenager and tries to emancipate and feels terribly wounded by this kind of abandonment, and he will blame the parent that is in front of him. So if the father leaves, let's say he's an alcoholic, the wife feels compelled to get him out of the house, the child will oftentimes turn on the parent that's there because that's all they have there in front. And they might even idealize the father who's absent, and they will get mad at mom. And so even though that's not fair, that's a child's experience. They're not very sophisticated psychologically yet, but they just know how they feel. Now, anger is actually better than confusion. Confusion comes in earlier childhood, and you have to be careful that they don't get too confused. And so, because that's clinically a more difficult stage, and you have to try to help them clear up the confusion. It takes quite a while to do that. Anger is easy because if you penetrate into the anger, of course, there's going to be tears because there's pain underneath it. They knew what they had, they lost it, and they're mad about it, but they're actually wounded by the things that went on by their parents. So let me get back to this issue of activation. Now, let's say the parent, one of the parents, let's say just as an example, mom, had been wounded at 5 years old or 6 years old, when their child hits 5 years old or 6 years old, the parent is going to become psychologically unstable because they are actually feeling their own pain because their child is reminding them of what they went through at that age. And the parent will become activated and might react to that activation in a variety of ways. If it's at 5 or 6, they might be confused and they might get depressed because they've had these feelings and they never resolved them at that age. And then if they are older than that, let's say 8 or 9, then the parent might get angry at the child for activating them, and they'll start hurting them verbally and take their anger out on the child. This activation issue is a very serious one, and that's why I'm bringing it up and making a pretty sharp point on it, that you don't want to take out your own emotional, psychological material on the child. Now, you're not going to maybe know that, but if you can listen to this talk and then start analyzing your own behavior, then what you want to do with that material is you don't want to hurt the child with it. You want to go into therapy, find a therapist that you feel comfortable working with, and tell them that when your child says this or does that or tries to emancipate or tries to confront you on your behavior, you need to then take that into your own private therapy and work it out so that you stop wounding your own children. It is the case clinically that it is the parents that wound their children almost all of the time. And it usually comes out of early childhood of the parents, and they don't remember that stuff anymore, and it comes out by raising their children. And if you stay angry, or if you weather the storm, let's say you were wounded at 5 or 6, the child goes into 5 and 6, you start reacting emotionally, and then let's say when the child hits 7, 8, or 9, all of a sudden that behavior of yours starts ebbing away and you become more stable because you're not getting activated quite so much. But the important thing is to try to catch your activation early. So if you know you've been wounded at a certain age, let's say 5 or 6, your parents got a divorce, and your child then hits that age and you start flipping out emotionally, then you want to get into therapy. Or let's say you had an alcoholic parent that wounded you repeatedly at most of your young years, from 0 to 8 or 9, and then he quit drinking. Then he stabilized, and then the family system stabilized, his marital problems perhaps stabilized or not, but hopefully they would. And then the child stabilizes because the parent is more present and available. If you think of a bunch of little animals, like little piggies trying to get nurse from the mother and getting milk, and they fight over the nipple. Children are like that too. They fight over attention and who's going to give it to them. If the mother, let's say, has already had 2 children and then a 3rd child comes along, there's no milk or juice left oftentimes, and then the child has to go to dad. And if the dad is there and receives that child, that 3rd one, then the child is fine and he will bond more with the father. But there's milk there too. And so if that works like that, if there's enough love in the family like that, and it's flexible enough, then that's good enough. And the mother, of course, will be there to a degree, but the father might be picking up 60%, say, something like that, as an example. But let's say the activation hits, you don't, either you have the financial resources to see a therapist, or you don't want to go into therapy because it might be difficult to realize that you're the one hurting your children. And believe me, in therapy sessions, when a parent realizes that, when they do some work and they realize they're the one hurting their own child, they weep, and it's very painful. And yet when they do that, it's, from a therapist's point of view, that's actually good, because now they're sensitive to the fact that they are hurting their own child. And the parenting style changes to where they become more sincere and they apologize. And structure, as a therapist, I would structure them to go home and look in the child's face tenderly and apologize. And the child receives that very tenderly too. And if the parent stays in therapy, then that wound will lessen and will be alleviated by and large, unless it gets exacerbated later. Let's go with the scenario that the parent doesn't get treatment. Then what that goes on with that particularly is that the child gets turned into the therapist of the parent, because the parent's activated, and when the parent's activated, they're not their age anymore, and they're certainly not in that mother role or father role. They are activated at the age that the child is at and is activating the parent. And so if it's 5 or 6, then the parent's 5 or 6. And the parent will then be learning and watching how the child reacts to getting wounded, and the parent will feel that that's helping them. But that is a seduction. That's improper. That's called emotional incest. And that is turning your child into your therapist, because you're looking to the child to activate you. So that's where you are wounding your child. So think about that. The child is paying the price, and the wounding that you got when you were 5 or 6 or whatever age, now the child is getting wounded with that same material. Therapists realize that it takes about 3 generations to launder out, let's say, an alcoholic father, and then the next generation is wounded, and then this next generation is not wounded so much, and the 3rd generation is normalized, as long as there's no more alcoholism and acting out, inside the system. So that's 3 generations, and so if you get in therapy yourself, no matter what the issue is, whether it's drugs or mental issues from your own childhood, whatever wounding there is there, and you get in therapy and you heal that yourself directly, then you're giving your children a break. You're giving them some hope in that they will heal and they won't be so wounded, and it might be just 2 generations, or they might come out, develop in those developmental stages more normally. They'll catch up eventually before they leave the nest at 17 or 18. So depending on the degree of the wounding, it could go like that, and it's important for the parent to understand that they're activated. And it could be that one parent isn't activated and can point out, look, you're getting depressed, or you're getting angry at the child, and maybe there's something going on inside you, where the one parent confronts their spouse to stop hurting their children. And that is legitimate. And to take that on, if you see that going on, don't stay quiet, even though you might get an emotional reaction from the other parent, defending themselves and getting angry at you for bringing it up. Take on that heat, because you need to get that parent in therapy and let them deal directly with what the activated material is. Now, this helps both people. It helps actually everybody. It helps the parent that's wounded, because it gives them, they're already activated. So you can get right into that kind of emotional material very quickly in a therapy session. It's so hot. You don't have to keep working backwards into the age material that takes sometimes months. That they're so hot about it now that they can go right into it as long as the therapist is well trained. But it also helps of course, the child, because then the parent stops hurting them. And it also helps the spouse. So the whole family system starts healing around that particular issue. Now, there's lots of issues that come up, and some of them need treatment, some of them don't. But it's good to understand that this activation thing needs professional treatment. Don't fool around with it. Don't minimize it. Don't act it out too long, because you need to realize you are damaging your children when that is going on. It's vital that you understand that, and it's vital that you as a parent use that as an opportunity to heal your own self and find, to get the help you need and ask for the help you need, basically. Now I'm going to segue a little bit into a healthy parenting model, just in a regular family. A child in nature, as a natural part of development, becomes very curious. These are blank slates, so to speak, to come out, and they are learning not just every day, they're learning hour by hour, when they are checking out their environment, and their parents, of course, are there and are reassuring them. A good parent, listen to this, a good parent is a good teacher. Children go through stages, and they sometimes will bond with the mother, and then they'll switch to the father, and then they can come back to the mother, and so forth. It goes back and forth, and it seems mysterious, but oftentimes it's that concept of finding where the love is available, and then they'll migrate, and then they come back and forth, and you don't need to get your feelings hurt about that. You should let them go and get some of dad, and then come back and get some of mom, and be very loving and forgiving about that. That's how children get raised. That's how they grow. And these are developmental stages that they go through. And part of the developmental stages, in all of these stages they hit, is curiosity. And they want to explore their environment. And they want to ask you a million questions. And you should answer these questions, even though to you they look obvious, and you try to hush them up because you can't always be receptive to the million questions that you get. However, you want to err on the side of answering these questions, these mundane questions, these sometimes idiotic. It isn't just for your attention. They are trying to figure that out, and they want feedback from you, and they want you to explain it. So take the time. It takes tremendous patience to be a good parent. It takes tremendous patience to be a good teacher, because you don't really understand all these different questions. And especially when they hit adolescence, they go through stages where they just continually are asking. As they go out into the world and they leave the family, the nest, and they start exploring, and they get into school, and they have all these friends, and they are going out into the world, and they just are overwhelmed by all of the things that they see. So they start checking things out with you. What does this mean? What happens with that? And you want to tell them the answer that you think if it's simple, and if you just have to take the time to answer to your best of your ability. And if you don't know that, then you should say, I don't really know, I'm not quite sure, but why don't you ask your dad, or vice versa. Use the other parent, and both of you should be on the same page with that part of answering all of these kinds of questions. Now, here's why that's important. And let me just say that this research comes out of psychological research comes out. Mostly what I've really found the most helpful is Piaget's work with children. He's sort of the grandfather of a lot of modern parenting, because he understood developmentally what they were doing. And this curiosity thing is so critical. So make sure that you answer the questions, and if you see the one parent not doing that, like, oh, don't bother me, I'm tired, and it's okay to do some of that. You can't always be present and available. Parenting is a role, it isn't you, and you're going to be overwhelmed sometimes and so forth, but they have the other parent to go to, and that's okay. You can play off each other like that. So you don't have to sacrifice your own sanity to keep answering every silly question they come up with, but do your best with that, because here's why. If the child grows up with curiosity and knows that he can turn to the parent and ask and get a good answer each time, the child will keep going with exploring his environment. So when he turns to adolescence, then he turns to a teen, and then he goes to school, and he enjoys learning. It affects his ability to learn. If you tell a child, no, 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 and obey me, everything I say, and if you don't, I'm going to smack you, or I'm going to put you in the closet, or whatever poor parenting methods in the past still loom, or the parent is drinking or doing drugs and just really isn't available. Then that child will have a tendency not to ask questions, and will do poorly in school, and then also most likely will not go to college, will not go to vocational school, will not become a supervisor. He'll become a laborer or something like that, where he doesn't have to ask questions, and isn't a good communicator because he was shut down too much in a family of origin. It goes back to family of origin. So, but if you take the time to go through this with your children, then keep answering their questions, then keep giving them puzzles and things to read, that their mind stays sharp and clear, and the mind will get trained to keep exploring, because you're just tying into a natural desire to explore, and that's what you want to cultivate. You want to keep your child's spirit bright, and that's how you do that. And then when they grow up and they go to high school and they make decent grades and they enjoy the learning experience, they are successful in the social world too, which is heavy in the high school age, they will most likely want to go on to either higher education or vocational skill that they really like a technical skill like electronics, computers, and whatever. But they enjoy learning and they do well in the classroom, and then of course a good teacher will continue that, to share that knowledge. So that's why you want to be very patient with children when they verbalize, and that you verbalize back and use your communication skills and to bring them up through the ages, and then when they hit the adult world, 16, 17, 18, they're planning their future, and they will choose those kinds of fields to keep going. And then they'll get into the workforce and have some real creativity unfolding. They're good communicators, they enjoy learning, they take classes that the elective classes in college, and they really enjoy that. So, and they have majors that, they cultivate those majors back in the teenage years where something really, turns them on in learning. And they will start migrating towards those fields. They don't have to study what you studied per se, or what kind of profession you're in, but naturally it might grow like from there. But the point of the talk is to stop act on the activation and get to the place where you're answering all their questions, and patiently they enjoy the learning process, and they leave the nest pretty successfully, and they can still relate to you as an adult, and there's good family systems kind of interaction. There's good maybe a college or some kind of training, and good social skills and so forth. And if you don't give them that, then they're going to just end up as a laborer, and they may not be very happy because they can't explore their environment because they're afraid. So if they have too much fear, that crushes their spirit, and they don't ask questions. So that's how it affects childhood, and then later on in adult life. So this is a talk about the psychology of parenting. It's an important one if you have children. It's also very important for you, even if you don't have children, to reflect on how you ended up the way you did, and what was your parenting like. It isn't impossible to work that through. If you have had a lot of painful experiences in your own childhood, then you want to find a therapist and work that material through. It isn't set in concrete. You can heal, you can unfold that stuff, and you can work it through, and you can become your own person through those wounds, and healing yourself and become stronger in the wounded places. And that is very possible. Therapists do that every day. So this is one talk in the series that I provide called The Cultivation of Wisdom, and parenting is a critical one. It's vital to understand this. So I hope this is helpful, and I hope if you need some help that you do get the help you need. So thank you very much.